Here are some Chinese definite noun phrases. The fourth one here, Beijing, used as a proper noun, a name, really only has one referent, the city of Beijing. Now, yes, the English translation here can be used to refer to things other than that specific city. For instance, how sometimes people use the word as a metonym for the government of China, as in, yesterday, Beijing announced a new economic plan, or something. But in that context, the word Beijing still only has a single possible thing it refers to. The other three phrases here are a bit more complicated. Unlike with Beijing, the meaning of the third phrase, 我妈妈, or my mother, will change depending on who is speaking. It's always the speaker's mother, but the actual reference is different if I say it, or you say it, or John says it, or so on. The determiners na and zhe, meaning that and this respectively, are even worse. They change their meaning based on a vast array of different context factors, including position and physical actions like pointing or looking at something. But in any given context, all of these phrases have something in common: lack of ambiguity. Now, to understand what I mean here by ambiguity, take the following dialogue between two friends. Timmy says, I met an interesting person yesterday. John says, really? What was this person called? John here doesn't know the first thing about this person. He doesn't even know what this person is called, as indicated by the question. John doesn't know who the mystery person is. What he's doing is pointing to a shared referent, a specific unit within the discourse. So, lack of ambiguity here means that we have selected the person we are talking about using this as our selection criteria. In this case meaning something like the referent that was just mentioned from the total set of things that the word person could refer to. It doesn't matter whether or not John knows which person he's selecting, as long as it's unambiguous in the conversation. The way these selectors are used varies from language to language. Languages might allow different placements, or they might differ even more drastically in how and when speakers most naturally use each word. This and zhe don't map onto each other one-to-one, but their underlying logic of selection and reduction of ambiguity is the same, and this we call definiteness. Whether it be through a connection to another known referent, physically gesturing towards something, a basis of common knowledge, or a particular conversation pattern, our noun has been defined in some way. But so far, we haven't even addressed the title of the video. Why have I spent so long on Chinese? A language that literally doesn't even have a word for the. Well, the thing I wanted to emphasize here is that definiteness is a semantic property of a noun phrase. Languages like Chinese and Russian and Japanese and many others don't have any way to express the. But as we saw at the start, this doesn't mean they don't have phrases that are definite. What it means is that they don't treat definiteness as a grammatical category. Words like this and that and my all have their own separate meanings. Yes, they are definite in that they select a referent, but they also give us information about what selection process is taking place. But most of the time, when none of these words are present in a noun phrase, but the referent of that noun phrase is still unambiguous, English requires a definite article. The encodes for definiteness. It tells us that the referent of a noun phrase is selected and unambiguous, but not what selection process is taking place. This is why you can point to something and say, could you give me the thing there? Or you can refer to common knowledge and say, I went past the school today. Or you can refer to something someone previously mentioned in the conversation. When you realize this, the starts to seem just like the biggest waste of space. It's used to tell us that a referent is unambiguous without telling us why or how. When could that possibly be useful? Well, it's never necessary. Of course, Chinese and Russian and Japanese all have ways of communicating everything that English can communicate. It's not like some languages are just worse than others. But it is noteworthy that English can make certain distinctions without having to emphasize a particular word. Take the sentences, a man and a woman appeared at the end of the street. The man approached me ominously. A man and a woman are indefinite. They're both just something out of the sets of things that can be labelled man or woman respectively. But in doing so, we pull a man and a woman from those sets, and in the next sentence we can refer to one of these without ambiguity. So even though we still don't know who the man is, we do know it's the man from the previous sentence. If we replace this with a man, then well, a new person is being added into the mix. It's clearly not the same man as in the first sentence. So, using explicit marking of definite and indefinite noun phrases, English has a neat little way to distinguish new introductions into the discourse from previously mentioned or known ones without placing any emphasis on the definite noun, as this man would. These sorts of grammatical and semantic oddities may technically be the hardest parts of learning any language. But if you're anything like me, then they're also the part that's the most fun. Doing the legwork of learning and revising vocab on a regular basis is often what causes me to lose motivation, and that's why I'm very happy to say that this video is sponsored by Timely Learning. Timely Learning is a browser extension that can help you with vocab learning through repeated and consistent exposure by using the broccoli technique. When you're online, just looking at web pages that you would be reading anyways, Timely Learning translates carefully chosen words into your desired language, so you can derive the meaning of the words through context. This doesn't just integrate your learning into your regular daily internet usage, but has also been shown to be effective by a peer-reviewed study. Across 58 participants, compared to people studying with traditional learning approaches, people who studied the broccoli technique on average obtained significantly higher retention rates short-term and were equally good at memorizing the vocabulary long-term. While it's still in development, Timely is completely free to use, and you can download the browser extension available on Chrome, Firefox, and Microsoft Edge via the link in the description. Thank you to Timely Learning for sponsoring this video, and now let's talk about the in French. Not all languages with definiteness treat this feature in exactly the same way. Just looking within English, let's imagine that you and I live in a village, and we are all aware of the village church. We call it the church. So in this hypothetical, both the church and, I don't know, France are shared knowledge definites. They have unambiguous reference because we all know what the church is, and we all know what France is. But one appears with a definite article here, and one without. France doesn't have a different determiner making it definite instead. It just appears on its own. So it seems that in certain contexts, the use of English the isn't just to do with lack of ambiguity, but with the presence of selection. Even though we know the church in our village, right, it's still referred to by picking it out of the set of churches. But when you get a proper noun like France, there's already only one. No need to select. This contrasts with, well, French, where they do say la France. French has a tendency to consider concepts definite if they contain an entire set. For instance, take a concept like animals, right? We have here a set of things that can be described as animals, represented by this circle. This is an animal. I can say in English, picking one of these out of the set, I like the animal. I can then say, referring to the thing I've selected, as definite. But if I go, I like animals, no definite article appears because we haven't selected anything from that set. In French, however, we say, j'aime les animaux, with a definite article because French says if we take the set as a whole, that's still definite. There's no ambiguity as to what members of the set are meant, because they all are. And that's exactly the same contrast as we see between la France in French and just France in English. Unfortunately, this doesn't hold up in all cases. Names of people, of cities, like Paris, don't take a definite article in French. There's nothing stopping them from doing so. Greek uses definite articles for personal names, place names, in fact with pretty much anything with an unambiguous referent that doesn't already have a determiner. Greek may just be an example of a perfectly clean and consistent definite article, but almost all languages with definiteness stray from this ideal to an extent. With French, of course, the definite article doesn't just carry information about definiteness, it also lumps in gender and number features. Le pain, we say, but la baguette and les animaux. And then the German definite article looks like this. And these features of case and gender really can't be disentangled from the realization of the definite article, but ultimately, these all correspond to English the. So for our purposes, we're going to consider these simple allomorphs, basically different ways of saying the same word depending on grammatical context. So ignoring all that weirdness, let's take a little look at the word order in these three languages. What we see in German and English is a clear word order tendency, with the article first, then our adjectives and stuff, then our noun. In French, though, most adjectives go after the noun. What we have here are different linearizations of the same noun phrase, one in English and German and one in French. But these structures are actually basically the same. The key is that the noun is the most embedded part of the noun phrase, then adjectives, and then the article. The order doesn't really matter as long as we don't get tangling, where a less embedded feature is closer to the noun than a more embedded one. This is why it isn't really surprising that some French adjectives decide to go between the article and the noun instead of after it. It just isn't a big deal. And that's why a structure like this, with the article at the end after any adjectives, should also be completely expected. And in fact, that's what we find, for example, in Basque, where the definite article is an enclitic element added to the noun phrase. Enclitic is a syntactic word, just like the English is, but it doesn't have independent stress. That means when you say it, it needs the support of another phonological word, like the apostrophe S in English its or she's. Not all contractions are clitics and not all clitics are contractions, but these are a good example of both. When clitics attach to the beginning of a word, they're called proclitic. When they attach to the end, like here in English, or here in Basque, they're called enclitic. Wow, I never thought I'd bring up Basque for the first time on this channel, just to give an example of it behaving exactly as expected and being extremely easy to analyze. We do have a fairly neat semantic justification for our linearization rules, which we will get to later, though note I say justification and not strictly explanation. But firstly, we should probably talk about what we do in cases where the linearization just doesn't look like that. Well, like all good generativists, we make it look like that. In Romanian, the man is omul, with this ul morpheme being enclitic, just like in Basque. But the issue comes when you add an adjective. The good man is omul bun. Uh-oh. But wait, Romanian also allows adjectives to go before the noun for the sake of emphasis, and when that happens, we get bunul om. Uh-oh. So this enclitic the always occupies the second position in the noun phrase. It's actually quite common that enclitics end up second in the sentence, second in the verb phrase, second in the noun phrase. This is sometimes referred to as a Wackernagel position. Well, in Romanian, it's not always second. If you say the very good man, the ul still attaches to the adjective, not the adverb. So we can say that ul has a degree of selectivity when it comes to its host. Basically, it's picky about what word it sticks onto. Still, terminus seems to be slap bang in the middle of the noun phrase here, not on its outer edges where it belongs. But what if, for the sake of the argument, just hear me out, we say, no, the ul is actually here. It's syntactically at the start of the noun phrase, but then in the spell out, when it comes to actually physically say the sentence we've built in our head, ul can't be here, because it's an enclitic. It needs a word before it, and there's no word before it that's within the same noun phrase, so it jumps down, a process called lowering. And if it sees that the word before it still isn't a valid host, it jumps down again. Bulgarian can be analysed in essentially the same way, the only real difference being that its enclitic definite article is slightly less picky about what words can host it. Albanian seems a bit more complicated at first, because its definite article is marked with so much case and gender information, but we've already seen this in the German definite article. If we accept that definite articles can encode this stuff, or at least agree with secret hidden features on the noun, then it shouldn't be strange to us that these Wackernagel enclitics can coincide with rich fusional morphology. But why not just say that the clitic is always generated in the second position, then drops down if it doesn't have a good enough host? Sure, this breaks our rules about embedding, but maybe those rules were wrong. Well, all of these languages have evidence that could suggest that determiners are actually noun phrase initial. In Romanian, for instance, the indefinite article appears in this position, and an independent article occurs with certain numerals. But I want to look here at the cross-linguistic perspective, and bring in some evidence from Arabic and Danish. See, in modern standard Arabic, the situation is slightly different. There are two clitic articles in MSA. Firstly, the indefinite, which surfaces as an enclitic n. This is called nunation in Arabic specifically, and is represented in the orthography by this double diacritic on the last letter. Secondly, we have the definite article l, which appears as proclitic at the front of the noun. This is our word for the. So we can say n and l start off in the syntax in the same position, on the outside of the noun phrase, but then get linearized differently. L can stay where it is because, well, it needs a host after it, and there's a noun after it. The direct contrast here provides us with some interesting evidence. It looks like the indefinite article only drops into the second position because it phonologically requires a preceding host. But can't we just say that these clitics generate in the second position and L requires a host after it, so it jumps up, undergoing syntactic raising? Well, firstly, the noun is the first word in the Arabic noun phrase, so if this were true, why can't L attach to the succeeding adjective? Okay, maybe it selects for nouns specifically, but secondly, in Danish, like in Romanian, the definite article attaches to the end of the noun. So house is hus, and the house is husel. However, unlike in Romanian, adding an adjective here before the noun doesn't cause it to take the article. Instead, we get a word for the. Describing the house with the adjective store leads to the phrase de store hus. So we can say that the definite article works like in Romanian or Bulgarian, an enclitic element that then lowers to attach to the noun. But it's one, much more selective about its host than either of those languages, with the Danish definite endings only attaching to nouns, and two, not willing to lower multiple times to find an appropriate host. So if an adjective is describing a noun, Danish goes, well, we can't attach to the noun, that's too far away. We can't attach to the adjective because that's not allowed, and thus the adjective essentially blocks the lowering process. However, this definite morpheme still needs a host, so it makes one up. It generates a word for the in this position. Therefore, the word de or den, depending on gender, ends up in complementary distribution with the enclitic form seen in husel or menen. If the here didn't generate at the outer edge of the noun phrase, then how does it end up there as soon as you throw an adjective into the mix? A very interesting tendency shared by Danish and Arabic is that they decline adjectives for definiteness. An Arabic phrase like al-baytul kabiru, the big house, contrasts with baytun kabirun, a big house. Similarly, in Danish, det store hus contrasts with et stort hus. The useful thing about Arabic and Danish here is that with the use of these adjectives, we get an indication as to what phrases are considered definite or indefinite, even when the noun isn't marked and there's no article to help us out. Just a little example, adjectives are only marked for definiteness when attributive, that is, within the noun phrase. Predicative adjectives, on the other hand, are never marked for definiteness, even if they describe a definite noun. So we get det store hus, but husel er stort, not husel er store. In Arabic, there's no word for to be, so this is actually how we show the difference between the noun phrase al-baytul kabiru, the big house, and the sentence al-baytu kabirun, the house is big. Information about gender, number, and in MSA, case are carried over, even when the adjective is in a different constituent, but definiteness? No. This is really nice evidence for something we've been assuming the entire video. That definiteness is a property not of nouns but of noun phrases, or determiner phrases if you're into that kind of thing. I also intuitively feel like this makes sense. When the adjective is attributive, it's sort of a part of the selection criteria. It becomes part of what narrows down and defines the search for the correct unambiguous referent. Another way of looking at this is that the adjectives and the noun together form a set, the set of all the things that can be called big house, and definiteness then applies to that idea, picking a referent out of that circle. And that brings us back to our ideas about linearization, with definiteness being a less embedded structure that tends to end up on the outskirts of the noun phrase. Adjectives further define the borders of the concept we're talking about, they define the set we're picking from, and only once all that work is done does the definite article step in to go, let's select one or more unambiguous reference from that set. Unless it's the whole set, then we don't consider our selection work important enough to warrant an article. Unless we're speaking French. Unless we're talking about personal names for some reason. Unless we're speaking Greek. Okay, maybe we should just go back to Chinese. That seemed much easier. So now you've heard my insane ramblings about But if you know your cake line, and you know you're Swedish, you might be thinking, hang on, why did you use Danish as your primary example of the Scandinavian languages? Swedish also has definite adjective endings, and you can't have wanted to embarrass yourself with your terrible Danish pronunciation, so why? Is what you're probably asking right now. Well, this video was supposed to be about two things. Swedish definiteness, and Scandinavian genitive constructions. Then, without my consent, it morphed into whatever this was, just free association of ideas, and it doesn't really even talk about either of those things. Definites in Swedish and Norwegian are subtly different from those in Danish, only subtly, and the difference seems just a trivial quirk to speakers of Scandinavian languages, but it's a difference that's led to decades of debate and confusion. So if this video gets 50 likes, I'll make the video this video was originally going to be.